Today I'm talking to Andriy Borovik, an expert in good governance, anti-corruption and European integration with extensive experience in implementing systemic reforms. He holds a degree in economic policy from UK and in business analysis and consulting from the Warwick Business School. We're going to be ranging over a number of topics, and hopefully this will be a teaser to a much longer conversation. As many of you know, we have had many conversations about governance, reform, people exercising their political agency and holding politicians to account. So this is a discussion that I've been looking forward to. And it is also thanks to the Lviv Media Forum that we're able to hold these conversations today. And I'm extremely grateful, not just for the space they've provided, but also the fantastic introductions and support they've given during these couple of days of the Lviv Media Conference. Andriy, welcome.
Thank you.
Let's start with a bit of an introduction to yourself. So if you give just a bit of an overview of the organizations you work with, what the key focus is, and why that work is so critical at this time.
Yeah, last 5 years I'm Executive Director of Transparency International Ukraine. It's a global movement. I'm leading the local Ukrainian chapter. What we do, we work on the number of reforms, and our main topics we are covering is anti-corruption reform. So we work on development of the anti-corruption institutions, monitoring of their work. Of course, monitoring the legislation. Also, we were one of those organizations who were at the very beginning and one of the engines of the public procurement reform in Ukraine. It's called Prosecuting, and we continue working on that. And we also involved in the local transparency and accountability. So we're not only paying attention to the national level, but to the local level as well. And all of this makes us pretty big organization comparing to typical CSOs in different countries. So yeah, that's we are.
And of course, people will ask, you've had this 30-year process after independence of gradually tackling systemic issues. I refer to it as de-Russification, but essentially, if you dig into it, it's tackling corruption, it's tackling nepotism, it's tackling the inefficiency that comes from a very vertical Soviet kind of mindset. If you're going to sort of zoom out, how much progress has been made over that period?
Honestly, I wish, but it's not actually true that we have all those things doing in the last 30 years. I would say that we started really doing stuff, not just providing some political promises, only after the Revolution of Dignity. So it's 11 years of the reforms in different spheres, and always is a good question, how is the progress? Okay, let's to see how, in order to understand the progress, we need to compare it to something, right? During the Yanukovych era, many people who were living in Ukraine, CSOs, businesses, experts, they would tell you that it was absolutely different country, because it was a time when the Yanukovych team was absolutely in each and every sphere of life of the country, and that group of people were controlling everything. As a result of their ruling, it's also one of the results that after Revolution of Dignity, many of them just left the country, staying in Russia or any other countries as well, because they understand that the things that they were doing cannot be stay unpunished. So for the last 11 years, I believe that Ukraine did tremendous progress in the reforms, and one of the indicators, as for us, of course, because Transparency International each year publish Corruption Perception Index. Yes, it's only about the perception, and this is not our perception, but the perception of the other, regarding Ukraine, 9 foreign think tanks who evaluate Ukraine, just in numbers. And the index is measured from 0 to 100. 100, no corruption, 0, total corruption, no state. So Ukraine had in 2013, 25 points. Now we have 35 points. That is plus 10 points for the last 11 years. Is it a lot? I think for those who understand what was happening in Ukraine last 10 years, including the beginning of the war in 2014, then all those political fights, now the full-scale invasion, it's pretty good progress. Could it be better? Yes, of course, it could be, because usually we add like +1, +2, sometimes it's -1, -2 points each year. But if to look, we were 25, now we are 35. I think this is okay, but at the same time, I must say that there is examples almost every year when some of the countries adding 4, 5, 6 points just in 1 year. But the question is how sustainable and how stable these results will be. What is good about and interesting about Ukraine, if you will look at the countries which are in war, Syria or Somalia or others, they're all very down.
They're actually going down, not up.
Not going up. We, at the same time, for the last 3 years, we got like plus. We are not going down. And this is what makes Ukraine as a unique example in the sense of the warfare. But I hope that we will progress, because if like the negative side is, usually people are asking, okay, what is average in the EU? Average in the EU is about 60 points, but EU is not the one homogeneous thing. There is a Hungary with 41 points, and there is like Great Britain with 70, something like this. So it's very different. But we need to, of course, doing everything what is possible to be higher in it. And for this we need reforms. Hopefully, with all this EU integration process, we will have more progress. But it will not happen immediately. It doesn't happen. The fight with the corruption, the reforms, not happening just in 1 day, and it cannot be done by one person. It's very complicated.
But if you ask the question, is it successful? I guess one way of looking at it is that progress intentional? Is there a target figure that's being aimed for? And is there a strategic plan to get there? And then to subdivide that question, does that strategic plan come from central government, or is this being driven by civic society and private organizations?
Yeah, frankly speaking, all those reforms that were started in 2014 were not. Okay, I would not say that it was purely not because of the intentions of the government, but one of the number one engines, it was the civil society and journalists, and the general public, because that's who were demanding the reforms. And the politicians, because they are politicians, they want to be re-elected for the next term, they were responding to it with some of the changes. Was it easy, or is it easy to do the reforms? Of course not. That the government has a strategic plan? Unfortunately, no. Whether there is any conceptual document on which there is a signature of the many civil society leaders or the journalists, again, no. What there is in place, and currently, by the way, in development, there was one example, there was 2 already anti-corruption strategies that is part of the legislation, and they need to be developed, and the country need to stick to it. The another one is now currently under development for the next 5 years. But this is a very good question for which I don't have an answer. Where is an ending point? What is a good result? Because when you will read, for example, enlargement report, which is published annually in November by European Commission regarding Ukraine, they saying that Ukraine has a very good progress, not very good, good progress in fighting the corruption. And given the number of investigations started by Anti-Corruption Bureau, number of convictions, a number of people prosecuted. Okay, a growing number, this is fine, but for example, Russian propaganda can use it and say, look, the numbers are growing of people investigated for corruption in Ukraine. It means that there is more and more of corruption in the country. This is actually not true. It means that these institutions working better and they can investigate more cases. But the good question is, when enough is enough? And unfortunately, I think nobody can answer this question.
Another question has to be, of course, whether, yes, certain people are being prosecuted. Is it systemic, though? Is everyone in the same lens being treated the same way? Or are there pockets of impunity where some people are sort of escaping that? I don't know the answer to that, but I think it's an interesting question. Is it, how powerful is this process and universal?
This process not only depends on the government or a sole prosecutor or sole institution like Anti-Corruption Prosecutor's Office. It depends on the system in general. Because if I will tell you that there is more than 300 convictions for the last 6 years almost, this year will be 6 years of work of High Anti-Corruption Court. Is it a good result? Someone might say no, it's not. It's very low. But if you will look at the first 4 years, from 2014, 2019, there were only 2 convictions. Because there was no specific institution, there is old-fashioned judicial system with lots of problems, and which one to reform will take lots of time. Again, someone might say, no, look, but whether they can put in jail, I know, the prime minister or the president, look, we don't know. What we do know, that 2 years ago, for now, this is the ex-head of the Supreme Court of Ukraine, was detained and he's under investigation now. And I think people just do not really undervalue what that case is, because this is the head of the Supreme Court. And just a quick reminder maybe to your audience that back in 2004 during the Orange Revolution, when there was a decision made to have the 3rd row of the presidential elections, when usually it's only two rows, it was done by the Supreme Court of Ukraine. And the guy who's the head of the Supreme Court taking bribes for cases. And he's now under investigation. So I think we are now much closer to not having any everybody can be investigated than before. But whether it's 100%, I'm not sure. And I do not believe that in any country, experts or the lawyers would tell you that yes, 101% people can be investigated.
It's no immunity. I mean, again, it's difficult to know.
But if you look at other cases with lots of like ex-ministers, deputy ministers, MPs, about 50 MPs in current Ukrainian parliament are under investigation. This is bad and good at the same time, because they are still members of the parliament, but they are investigated.
Yeah. And for those who are listening who may be based in Britain or something, say, that sounds terrible actually. A short reminder that if you look at the MPs in Britain, the statistics suggest that MPs are statistically more likely to have committed crimes and been prosecuted in Britain as well than the average in the population. So that's a useful little reminder there. You mentioned the pace of reform, and in previous conversations it's been fascinating to sort of understand how the practice of journalism, I won't say it was easy to reform it, no, it took a lot of will, it took a lot of effort, but it was possible to essentially quickly move beyond the kind of old guard trend on the Soviet system and generate a new generation of journalists, because you can grab people who are very young before their minds are formed. The judiciary is something different, isn't it? You can't just have an instant judge. It takes decades to get to that hierarchy. So what are the challenges in judicial reform that, say, journalism perhaps didn't face?
And lots of challenges. Political interests. Judicial system before 2014 and still is. There is groups of people inside of the system who are against any changes because they got used to that style of life which they had. But as soon as they're the judges, they know all the loopholes. To close those loopholes, you need changes to the legislation. But legislation, in the reforms, it's only maybe 20% of success. All the problems comes out during the implementation, and then implementation is the key. Even a bad law, you can try to implement in a good way. In the same time, the perfect law can be horribly implemented. So implementation is a key. And political interest, imperfection of the internal bureaucratical processes. Sometimes it takes just too much time to do something because they do this in the old-fashioned way. And judicial reform is, and also let's remember that this is thousands of judges. It's only judges, but judicial system is not only judges. It's assistants and just the civil servants. It's like thousands of people. You cannot just in 1 year change all of that. Change all the procedures which were in place like decades and decades and decades. So, and this is actually the common problem for any reform. Sometimes it is easier to overcome them. For example, with public procurement, it was a little bit easier to do all of that. And we have now Prozora, everything is transparent, but someone saying that look, we did the reform, but now all the corruption is transparent in the procurement. Yeah, if to look at it, for example, as a comparison to public procurement, and now like we have this Prozora, everybody sees everything, and the corruption is transparent as well. For your British audience, I'm sure they know that there is a huge scandal in Britain regarding the COVID response money. In Ukraine at the same time, during the COVID, we had the most transparent process of spending this money, because yes, there were exclusions from the rules and there was no competition because everything was organized, but everybody saw see everything, and all the contracts were published. Everything is not even close to many Western countries, and then Britain not the only country where it became a problem response to COVID in a accountable and transparent way. In Ukraine, it wasn't an issue, but so.
Corruption is the big focus, but that's not the only problem. I'm fascinated to hear how other things are tackled. It seems that nepotism is as destructive as corruption can be, and sometimes more so, because it's far less obvious and does more long-term damage. But also there's sort of, say, the Soviet hierarchy, the sort of Soviet sort of mindset, and the inertia that comes with that, as well as, I would say, bureaucratic risk aversion. So some things can't be, aren't overtly corrupt, but they can still prevent opportunities from happening. They can still slow things down. Is that far more difficult to deal with, that kind of thing?
It is, because it's really harder to give like a certain term to that or another process. Because when there is a corruption and you understand that this is where you say, oh, this is a corruption, this is bad. Mm-hmm. But when you see that there is just lack of abilities, there is lack of knowledge, there is lack of qualities, and the quality, especially because of the full-scale invasion, in general, the quality is going down because millions of people are outside of Ukraine. And from the point of view of the human resources and the labor market, we have a huge issue. And this is an issue not only regarding the business, we also facing it as a civil society organizations. I'm struggling to find the right people to work for us, professional ones. Same with the government. And also, unfortunately, the civil servants not getting that pay that they must have for their work, and not the ministers doing all the job. Mm-hmm. They only showing the direction. All the job is done by civil servants who would never be at the headlines of the news, usually. And one of the things that is probably specific for Ukraine, we quite often see corruption where there is no corruption, because where there's no corruption but there is a mismanagement and really poor managerial decisions,
like a leadership, incompetence,
yes, all of that. But usually we Ukrainians say that all of this is a corruption. Mm-hmm. That's not always true. I'm not undermining the problem of corruption in Ukraine, of course not, but the problem of incompetence is also growing. Mm-hmm. And the mismanagement and all of these things, it's really harder to tackle this problem during the process of reforms, because it's hard to identify it, hard to explain, and you spend lots of dozens of hours just to explain to somebody that we need to do this way because this is more efficient, better, and that's how we can get the result faster, rather than getting it the wrong way.
And of course, that requires changes in education systems, leadership processes. It's a far longer term challenge, I guess.
It takes, at least a generation, I believe, in order to change the educational system, because let's start with problem of the petty corruption. That's your everyday life. Let's not about the very top level. The level of the petty corruption in Ukraine, according to sociology polls, is going down. I believe this is because of the digitalization and the reforms.
That's going to be my next question, yes, the role of that,
The last 10 years, it limits the possibility for the corruption when there is lack of people in the process, the digitalization, but it not eradicates it completely. And digitalization cannot eradicate the corruption in the country, because when there is a higher level political decisions regarding the corruption, it can limit it on the petty level. So about the education, my thought, when you get into trying to send your kid to the kindergarten, sometimes you can be asked for a bribe, right, as a parent. Mm-hmm. Then you go to the school, something may happen there, then the university, and then in the end, when the person is 21 years old, he or she knows all that was done by his parents, and for him, sometimes it becomes just normal.
Yeah.
But what makes Ukraine is also not unique, but what is good, and we usually do not always talk about this. But if to look at the sociology polls, there is a couple of them that's done every 2 years and with the same questions. One of the questions is about whether you Do you perceive the corruption, is it bad or good? For the last 10 years, the number of people who say that I would never accept corruption and I will never do corruption in my life is I think around 64%. 10 years ago, it was about 50. So the perception...
That's a significant change.
And this change, this is a cultural change. And the perception change takes ages, right? No. It cannot be changed within 1 year.
And the digitalization process itself, because of course, let's say in the payment of basic benefits and certain processes, state registration processes, a lot of that's moved to digitalization. Has that sort of closed off space, which is weaker when you rely on personal interactions, visiting offices, paying officials? Is that digitalization something that actually can be accelerated to further tackle the processes of corruption?
I think digitalization is a very good stream for the changes in the country. First of all, because it limits inefficiency. Because when there is more and more people and people making the decisions in the operations where they should not making those decisions, when there is like only yes or no or maybe third answer, and how it was, let's say in 90s, you should come to somebody, ask him to do actually his or her job.
His job, yeah.
And for this, they asking you the bribe.
Yes.
Digitalization,
no.
The zeros and ones in the code, they cannot ask you for a bribe.
And sometimes the bribe is monetary, but sometimes the bribe would be gifts or objects or favors.
It's like favors, that again should not be in place.
Yeah.
That was, by the way, about the gifts and favors and others, it was usual the case within the medical system. The first level of your family doctors, yes. The reform that was done during the Poroshenko was the president. Now the doctors know that the more patients they have, the more money they receive as their salary. And I know from people from my bubble, but not from working bubble, from other spheres of life, they don't even have it in mind anymore to give like a chocolate or something like this, because they know that this person gets a salary, and she or he also know that.
Yes.
And that's what's also helps to change the system. It was, by the way, also partially digitalized, so you can go online, look what are the doctors, how many patients they have, and to choose, and you can interact.
Success rate, maybe after that, maybe that's the next stage.
The success rate within the medical system, I would say it's maybe not the best thing to do. It can, I think it can be faked easily, but that's actually removed now. And digitalization removes such things in many processes, because honestly, people sometimes do not even feel. Usually when we talk about digital, what we know, DIA. DIA from the Vice Prime Minister Fedorov, and that's what they did. But DIA is not only digitalized thing. There is much more things which you can do without DIA just because the process was digitized.
Yeah. No, that's absolutely so fascinating. And the last topic we'll turn to in the time we've got. This may seem a little abstract at this point, not so much in Lviv. I mean, we see this extraordinary construction of even the place we are, the tech city. And there's lots of sort of investment and stuff going on. But of course, when it comes to the full reconstruction of Ukraine, of course, we have to assume a world where, I don't know, Russia's collapsed, Ukraine retakes its territories. Not only is that a gargantuan effort and a lot of difficult strategic decisions about which cities to rebuild and which ones not to, but also, we would be perhaps fooling ourselves to say that that isn't an extraordinary opportunity for not just corruption, but also the kind of inefficiency that might waste some of those funds that are being invested.
But corruption as well. Let's be honest. The more in any sphere where there is growing numbers of dollars or euros, right? There is opportunity for the corruption and for mismanagement. We already mentioned that the COVID expenditures, that was in many countries, there were lots of scandals about that. And of course, the reconstruction can be troubled with the corruption and inefficiency as well. What can be done in order to limit it? I think, unfortunately, our Western partners do not remember already how the reconstruction was done in Europe, for example, after the Second World War. Lots of people talking about the Marshall Plan, but if you look at the Marshall Plan and actually its influence on the economies of the countries, it's not as big as we are usually love to talk about it. It's just a good sentence in the history book about the Marshall Plan and all Europe was rebuilt, but it's not.
It didn't quite happen that way. Yeah.
Yeah, it's happened in a different way. And if you will dig deeply, you will see that were also lots of cases of the mismanagement and inefficiency. I think that what Ukraine did right, that immediately in 2022, after the partial liberation of the territories, I know there is lots of groups of people and also the government started working on the reconstruction, in the sense not physically rebuilding, but thinking about how it should look in the longer term. There is a very good system called the DREAM that is developed by Open Contracting Partnership and the partners and the ministry that will allow all the public investments being transparent, starting from the idea and ending with the construction. So basically, you staying in the UK, you can go online and see how the money of the aid from the UK are spent in Ukraine regarding the reconstruction. This is one of the things. Another one that there is, unfortunately for now talks, but there is no strategy for the reconstruction. There is not enough of the legislative base for the reconstruction, but there is some work going on already. And I think that when we will have the strategy, when we have implementation plans, there is still will be lots of people who will be unhappy, because there will be a very good question, where we building first the hospital or the school in that city or another one. That's why we need a prioritization methodology. But you cannot make everybody happy in such a huge process as a reconstruction. But I think that we have a very good chance to give the world another good example of the reform and systems in the sense of the reconstruction, like we did with the public procurement system ProZorro, because it gets all the possible nominees and the prices globally regarding the public spendings. And the reconstruction can be another our success story. But for this, there should be enough of the political will for that, and enough of the attention from the general audience that will mean that the journalists and the civil society will do their job as well. Now, civil society is usually doing two jobs at the same time. We're working as a watchdog, but we're also working as a co-implementers with the government. But unfortunately, I think it's not on the agenda now. I mean, in the bigger sense, there is some work is ongoing, but in a bigger sense, it will be possible only after the end of the military actions and when there will be enough of the security guarantees, whatever it means.
Well, Andriy, we've run out of time, unfortunately, but I'm hoping that we will have the chance to have other conversations in the future and dig into this as things evolve, and of course, as Ukraine moves closer to what I firmly believe will be an eventual victory. Thank you so much for meetings here at the Lviv Media Forum and sharing your extraordinary insights for the audience.
Thank you for this conversation.